All right, good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening. We are continuing in Eretz Hashem tonight. I know that last week I said it was the last week of Kapitel Ayin Aleph 71, but the truth is we're going to spend one more week on this particular Kapitel of Tehillim. There are sheets, if anyone needs, there are sheets, source sheets right up here. I don't know if they're by the Bima also. Probably not. Are they by? Yeah. Good, or over here. Thank you. So we are continuing in Eretz Hashem tonight in Kapitel Ayin Aleph 71. We dedicate our learning in Eretz Hashem in the Schus Refuah Shalima for Sarah Bas Ita Devora. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, she together with Kol Cholei Yisrael will have a complete and enduring refuah. So let us begin. So remember again, last week's shir, we actually spoke about the incredibly riveting pasuk of Al Tashlichini Le'ezigna Kichlos Kochi Al Ta'azveni. So we saw that again. I highlighted over here in source number 1. Again, you know this is not the pasuk that we're focusing on. And remember again, in general, this kapitel, remember we saw a couple of weeks ago, actually 3 weeks ago, we saw that the nature of this kapitel, David HaMelech wrote when he was experiencing much incredible conflict, like much of Sefer Tehillim that David HaMelech wrote in conflict, so this kapitel was no different. And over here, again, he's in conflict with Avshalom, in conflict ultimately, again, with internal enemies, external enemies. What I want to draw your attention to tonight is if you take it in source number 1. So I put the entire kapitel on the page, but I really want to focus on Psukim Yud Aleph, and Yud Beis. So David HaMelech says, Ki amru oivai li v'shomrei nafshi na'atzu yachdav. Literally translated, for my enemies said of me, and those who watch my soul took counsel together, saying. So they took counsel together. Pasuk Yud Aleph, Leimar, what did they say? Elokim azavu ridfu v'tifsua ke'in masil. So just understand, David HaMelech is saying, when people talk about me, they say the following. What do they say? They say ultimately again, God has forsaken him, pursue and seize him, for there is no rescuer. So when people spoke about David HaMelech, essentially they said this guy, he's condemned. He's condemned, right? He's done. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has left him. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has forsaken him. David HaMelech, there is no hope for him. Elokim, and so David HaMelech says in return, he says, Al tirchak mimeni Elokai le'ezrasi chusha. So David HaMelech says, oh God, do not distance yourself from me. My God, hasten to my assistance. So a very overwhelming set of psukim here. So on one hand, again, we've come to see over our journey in Sefer Tehillim how so much of Sefer Tehillim is David HaMelech like exuding a sense of desperation, of sadness, of loneliness. David HaMelech, Rabbi Soloveitchik writes about this. Rabbi Soloveitchik had an incredible work called The Lonely Man of Faith. The Lonely Man of Faith. And in Rabbi Soloveitchik speaks about the concept of emunah. And in the introduction to it, he explains that there's a difference between being lonely and being alone. Those are two different things. He explains being alone means I'm by myself, there's no one else around. He says being lonely is something very different. You could be in a room full of people, and so I'm not alone, but yet you could still feel profoundly lonely. We've all experienced this in life. Generally, when does one experience loneliness? When there's something happening in your life that no one else can relate to. When you're going through something, right, and you go ahead and you look at the rest of the world and everybody's living their lives and everything is going on as normal and everything looks just like it did yesterday and the day before, and meanwhile your life is so fundamentally different and changed, that's when a person feels profoundly lonely. I may not be alone. I may be surrounded by people, but I feel profoundly lonely. One of the most heartbreaking components of Sefer Tehillim is David HaMelech's almost lifelong loneliness. David HaMelech was lonely. Never alone, but profoundly lonely. Because you see, whenever David HaMelech speaks about his life, what does he describe? He describes enemies. He describes ultimately, again, this one's pursuing me, this one hates me, this one despises me, internal enemies, external enemies. And so here, what's incredible in this particular kapitel, so David HaMelech is describing this dynamic where people are essentially saying, God has forsaken me. God has given up on me. God no longer cares about me. So therefore they say that David, you're vulnerable. If you don't have HaKadosh Baruch Hu's protection, then by definition, you're vulnerable. And then David said, now, David said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please don't leave me. Please don't forsake me. Please don't reinforce the sense of loneliness. If you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says in number 2, Ki amru oivai li, my enemies said about me, amru oivi alai, v'no'atzi yachtov leimar, Elokim ozvu ein anu ne'enosh nalav shekvar nichshal ba'avera. So now remember again, David HaMelech says, my enemies say, David HaMelech's enemies said, we could do anything we want to David, and nothing's going to happen to us. Why? Because David has already been forsaken by God. Now, why would people think that David was forsaken by God? So remember again, what's incredible about so much of Sefer Tehillim is that all roads lead back to one central event, which was the episode of David and Bathsheba. Everything leads back to that. You know, in general, it's an interesting thing in life how on any given day we have to make decisions, right? No matter how much you want to avoid making decisions, we always have to make decisions. Not making a decision is also a decision. What the good news is that many decisions in life don't necessarily have lasting consequences, right? You decided to eat fleischiks instead of milchiks for dinner, it might impact your dessert choice, but aside from that, the world is going to go on, right? Even sometimes like the job you choose to take, okay, you do like this job, you don't like this job, you could always pivot at different points in life. But yet we know that there are certain moments in life where you make a decision, and that decision fundamentally alters the trajectory of your life. Sometimes for good, sometimes not for good. It's those crossroad decisions that just put you. You know, I remember when I was a kid, they used to have these choose your own adventure books. I don't know if anyone reads books anymore, but you know, if Johnny goes left, you know, turn to page 42. If he goes right, turn to page 26, right? And incredible. And like literally one decision in that moment sends the book in two different directions. So one decision in life sometimes sends life in two different directions. For David HaMelech, that pivotal, almost intersectional event was the episode with Bathsheba. David HaMelech's life was on one trajectory before that event and was fundamentally put on a different trajectory after that event. Now to be clear, the trajectory post Bathsheba is not a bad trajectory, just the opposite. Remember, David ends up marrying Bathsheba. They have a child together. The union is blessed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The proof to that is the Ribbon Shalom names their child. Right? Remember again, their child was Shlomo, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu named. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu named Shlomo, Yedidya, right? The beloved one of God, which means that HaKadosh, and Ribbon Shalom doesn't usually name people, but he named Shlomo, which means HaKadosh Baruch Hu blessed the union, which meant that what happened was supposed to happen. Not that it freed anyone from liability or culpability, but clearly was supposed to happen. But what happened for David HaMelech is it fundamentally put his life in a different trajectory. Remember again, we saw the Gemara Masechah Shabbos, a heart-wrenching Gemara, that David HaMelech's detractors would not let him forget about the episode with Bathsheba. They would not let him forget it. They reminded him about it. And by the way, you know, the one thing you're not allowed to do to a Baal Tshuva, the one thing you're not allowed to do is remind them of their past. It's an Aveira. So the Gemara says, David would walk into the Beis Medrash and they would say, David HaMelech, by the way, what is the punishment for adultery? Just out of curiosity, right? What is the punishment for adultery? And David HaMelech obviously would be profoundly humiliated. And he would say, there's good news and bad news. There's a punishment for adultery, but the good news is you have a portion in the world to come. But when you embarrass someone, you lose your portion in this world and in the world to come. Why am I sharing this with you? Because this was what David HaMelech had to contend with each and every day of his life. And so here in this pasuk, he's saying, my enemies say to me, David, God does not want anything to do with a guy like you. Not a guy who behaves. I know it sounds strange for us to speak about David HaMelech like this, right? David Malka Mashiach, David HaMelech, the father of the dynastic monarchy, the father of Messianic line. But as we always say, when do great people become great? When do they become great? Right? When they're dead. Right? Generally, great people are treated like garbage when they're alive. Suddenly, again, when they die, that's when everybody, you know, like it's an incredible thing. You go to a Levai Rachmana litzlan. The incredible thing is when they take the Aron out, everyone stands up. Everyone stands up. The same person during their lifetime, people might have ignored, right? People might have marginalized, peripheralized, mistreated, but we have a profound respect for the dead. So therefore, again, great people often only really become great or recognized as really great posthumously. That's just the way that it works. So David HaMelech is saying in this particular kapitel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, everybody's saying, you've washed your hands of me. Everyone's saying, David cannot have a relationship with God because God would not want a relationship with a person who does stuff like he did. Kadosh Baruch Hu would not want that. And David says, Kadosh Baruch Hu, I'm asking you to please not wash your hands of me. I'm asking you to please not reject me. We've seen this theme a couple of times already. I'm asking you not to distance yourself from me. Elokim, al tirchak mimeni. Do not distance yourself from me. Elokim la'ezra si chusha. Kadosh Baruch Hu, when I call out to you, I need you to be there. So look at number 3, the Eben Ezra. So the Eben Ezra says as follows. The Eben Ezra says, V'shomrei nafshi. There's one more piece to this. David HaMelech says, V'shomrei nafshi. Now, what's interesting to note is as follows. If you go back to number 1 for just a second. I'm sorry, we're jumping around here. If you go back to number 1 for just a second, look at Pasuk Yud. So what does David HaMelech say? Ki amru oivai li. My enemies said about me, V'shomrei nafshi no'atzu yachdav. Now, how would you translate the phrase Shomrei Nafshi? How would you translate that? Literal translation? People who guard my soul. Does that sound like friend or foe? Friend. Sounds like friend, right? Which is interesting. So what does it mean, Shomrei Nafshi, right? What does that mean? So the Eben Ezra says something incredibly profound. The Eben Ezra writes, number 3, he says, Shayisi mechashev shem ozrai v'no'atzi yachtav imoivai. David HaMelech says, it's not just that people turned against me. It's not just that I have to contend with people who dislike me. But he says, you know what the most painful part was? There are people who I thought were my friends. People who I thought had my back, and they betrayed me. You know, that I have enemies, David HaMelech says, okay, we all have enemies, right? We all have people, unfortunately, that we don't like, and people that don't like us. That's just the nature of the world, especially, again, a person in a leadership position. But at least David HaMelech says, I thought that I had people on my side. I thought that I had friends. I thought that I had allies. And then it turned out that even my allies were really plotting behind my back. You feel from David HaMelech's words, like, again, going back, that profound sense, David HaMelech is never alone. But you hear in his words that profound sense of loneliness. So here David HaMelech is saying, this is what people say. This is how it makes me feel. And now, Kadosh Baruch Hu, what I'm asking of you, what's the ask? The ask is, don't abandon me. The ask is, don't abandon me. Now, what's incredible, and this is why I couldn't move on from this kapitel without exploring this a little bit more. What's really fascinating about this is David HaMelech saying that because I sinned, because I made a mistake, people said I'm worthless. That's the bottom line. Because I made a mistake, people said I'm worthless, and therefore not deserving of God's love and not deserving of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's protection. And so David HaMelech says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu essentially prove them wrong. Give me your love, give me your protection. So what's interesting is, okay, now go back up to number 1 for just a moment. So how does the kapitel end? Because this is actually the last week we're doing Ayin Aleph. We're going to move on next week in Meretz Hashem. So how does the kapitel end? Look, so what's the concluding phrase? So Pasuk of Dalid 24, source number 1, last Pasuk. Gam l'shoni kol hayom teget tzidkasecha, ki boshu, ki chafru, mevakshe ra'asi. Also my tongue will utter your righteousness all the days. For those who seek my harm are shamed, for they are disgraced. So what's interesting is, by the time we get to the end of the kapitel, what happens? David HaMelech is on top. David HaMelech is redeemed. David HaMelech ultimately is exonerated, right? And all of those who sought to harm him, ultimately, again, themselves are disgraced. Now, we know already, so remember, all of this is happening in one chapter. So obviously, nothing's changing, in that, like situationally, nothing's changing over the course of time that David HaMelech is writing these words, right? Yet, what's changing? So situationally, nothing's changing. What's changing? His attitude is changing. So the question becomes, and this to me is what I thought was incredibly intriguing, is how does one undergo this attitude change? Right? Because think about it for just a moment. we all have moments. All right, the David HaMelech situation was an amplified one, but the truth is we all have moments where we make really bad mistakes. And the aftermath of those mistakes, how do we generally feel? Right? Like a zero. I feel like a nothing. I feel like literally I'm done. I made the big, quote unquote, the biggest mistake of my life, and I'm done. And just like, that's it. It's a dead end. It's a dead end. And if other people know, so that's, by the way, that's even only in a situation where you know about your mistake. And then if other people know about the mistake, right, the humiliation, the pain, the embarrassment, put that all together, and really I feel like this is the end of the road. It's the end of the road. And yet David HaMelech says you could feel that way, and yet bring yourself back from the brink. You could feel so despondent, so hopeless, this feeling like life is never going to get any better, and yet, between Pasuk Yud and Pasuk Chavdalid, 14 verses, you could fundamentally change the way you feel about yourself. I think as we get older, we recognize, there's the famous Vart of the Sanzarav. Sanzarav said, famous idea, I don't think it's often attributed to him, but it was his statement. Sanzarav says, when I was a young man, I planned on changing the world. As I got a little bit older, I decided I'm going to try to change my country. As I got a little bit older, I'm going to try to change my town. I got a little bit older, I decided I was going to try to change my Hasidim. He said, now I am an old man, and I recognize the only thing I could change in this world is me. But it takes a lifetime often to get that. So obviously, what's happening over here in Kapitel Ayin Aleph is, nothing is situationally changing for David HaMelech. What's only thing that's changing in David HaMelech is his perspective, and most more specifically, his perspective of himself, how he views himself. In Pasuk Yud, he views himself as a zero, as a result of the terrible life mistakes that he has made. And by the time we get to the end of the Kapitel, Pasuk Chavdal 24, he's changed his perspective. Suddenly he recognizes I'm not a zero. Suddenly he recognizes that I am a meaningful person. Suddenly he's realizing my life does have worth. I do have goodness. I do have Kedusha. So there's something profound happening over here. How do you because I think we've all been in that situation where you feel so terrible about yourself. And you recognize, the mistake in life we often make is we look for other people to make us feel better. And that's the worst thing you could do. The worst mistake in life is outsourcing your happiness to other people. Because then you're giving everyone else all of the control and robbing yourself of it. Happiness is a choice. Happiness is a decision. You choose how you feel, and more specifically, you choose how you feel about yourself. So situationally, the same detractors that David HaMelech had in Pasuk Yud, he has in Pasuk Chavdalid, right? It's not everybody became friends, right? Everybody's still attacking him. But yet, again, in his own mind, something shifted, something readjusted. What was it? So I want to show you something interesting, and I think this is sometimes Baruch Hashem, the incredible hashgacha pratis, so like the confluence of events, because I think the answer to this question is actually found in the opening pasuk of this week's parsha. Really, really incredible. So take a look at number 4. This is the first pasuk. This week we have the incredible privilege to read Parshas Mishpatim, and the opening pasuk is Ve'ela Mishpatim Asher Tasim Lifneihem. These are the laws that you shall place before Klal Yisrael. Now remember again, Parshas Mishpatim, this week's parsha, is almost exclusively focused on laws of damages, interpersonal laws, right? One person damages another, one person steals from another. That's pretty much the exclusive focus of Parshas Mishpatim. But the Parsha actually begins with an interesting halacha. Ki sikna evet ivri, if you will buy a Jewish slave, a Jewish servant, so sheish shanim ya'avod, the servant works for 6 years, uba shvi'i yetzi lechav chinam, and in year number 7, the slave goes free. Now, just by the way, as an aside, the 6-year clock begins from whenever you purchase the slave, right? This is not a halacha in Shemitah, right? This happens to be also 7th year, but it's not a din in Shemitah. The halacha is you purchase a Hebrew slave, you purchase a Jewish servant, and by the way, even I know, when we use the word slave has such a negative connotation to it. Again, especially in this country with the history of slavery, we understand that. Understand, of course, that the Jewish concept of servitude or slavery is fundamentally different. The Gemara is filled with all of the halachos that a master has and obligations that a master has towards his servant, right? Whatever you eat for dinner, your servant eats for dinner. Whatever your quality of life is your servant's quality of life. So one is obligated. So essentially, really, in quote unquote, like a Jewish servant is really just a full-time or extra full-time employee who you are obligated to take care of in a holistic fashion. In any event, so the Torah tells us you purchase for yourself an Eved Ivri. He's going to work for you for 6 years, and on the 7th year he goes free. Turn the page. So Rashi points out to her something interesting. Rashi says, well, how exactly does one acquire for themselves an Eved Ivri? Right? Where do you go for that? Right? What kind of person is becoming a Hebrew, a Jewish servant? So Rashi says over here, Kisikna. Now it's interesting, but if you look at the pasuk, the lashon of the pasuk is, if you will purchase an Eved Ivri, who are you purchasing him from? So Rashi points out there, number 5, Kisikna miad bezdin shemachru b'gnei baso. So let me tell you this outside. So how does a person become an Eved Ivri? So Rashi points out the typical way would be as follows. You have a guy, Ruvain, just for illustration purposes. Ruvain steals from Shimon. Ruvain steals $50,000 from Shimon. Ruvain goes to the casino, loses it all. No more money. Now Ruvain has an obligation to pay back Shimon, but Ruvain has no money. So how does this work? So the answer is that Ruvain is sold into servitude, and effectively he works off the debt. Whether that means he's sold to Shimon, so to speak, to pay off the debt, or he's sold to a third party, and the proceeds of his sale go to the victim, go to Shimon. So that's how a person becomes an Eved Ivri. You stole, you can't pay back that which you stole, Beis Din will sell you. Now the truth is, there is another scenario. The other scenario is, technically speaking, if a person is so destitute that they have no money, technically they could sell themselves into servitude. You could do that, but we'll focus on the first part. That's why the Torah uses the lashon of kisikna Eved Ivri. If you will go ahead and, by the way, I apologize for the lack of heat. I'm sorry we're having a problem with the system. But there is a dedication opportunity for the HVAC system in the new building, if anybody would like. That is still open. Anyway, so what happens? So now, that's kisikna. So that's the lashon. That's the lashon ultimately, again, if you acquire an Eved Ivri, if you acquire this Eved. Okay. The obvious question is, why does the parsha start off with this halacha? Right? Think about this for just a moment, and we'll delve more into this. But this parsha, Parshas Mishpatim, is, as we said, a parsha of Mishpatim. Mishpatim means interpersonal law, right? Tort law, damages, or everything, everything that you need on an interpersonal level is all in Parshas Mishpatim. Out of all the things to start with, why are we starting with the laws of Eved Ivri, of the Jewish slave? Why? By the way, I'll compound the question a little bit. Compound the question is, remember, how do you become an Eved Ivri? Let's go back for a second. How do you become an Eved Ivri? How do you become one? You stole. Guess what? In Parshas Mishpatim, a little bit later on, the Torah speaks about the laws of theft. So what would make more sense in the arrangement of the parsha? What would make more sense? First talk about the laws of theft, and then speak about the Eved Ivri. So we really have like a double question over here. Why begin with Eved Ivri altogether? Why is this the first thing? That's number one. And number two, even if you feel like there's an urgency in discussing it, would it not make more sense to first talk about the laws of theft and then get into the laws of Eved Ivri? So take a look at number 6. The Medrash is bothered by the same question. And the Medrash writes as follows. It says, Pasach b'mishpat Eved Ivri. Why does the Torah begin over here, this parsha, with the laws of Eved Ivri? The Medrash is very simple. Lefi Shahayu avodim b'Mitzrayim. Because remember again, we were 7 weeks out of Egypt. I remember again, Parshas Mishpatim occurs after Aseret HaDibros, after Matan Torah. Matan Torah occurs 50 days, 49 days after we leave Mitzrayim. So we're about 7 weeks, about 2 months out of Egypt. Upedama HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'naslam cheros. That's what happened. We were slaves. HaKadosh Baruch Hu went ahead and redeemed us and gave us freedom. Lefichach tziva liyisa barishona, shelo l'shabed ba'achiu befarech v'lo l'shabdo l'doros, kiyim at shana shiyas. So this is interesting. According to the Medrash, why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu start with the laws of the Jewish slave? Because the Jewish people at this moment in history had an acute sensitivity to the plight of the slave. They knew what it was like to be a slave. They understood what it meant to be at the whim of a despotic and unpredictable master. They understood all this. And therefore the Medrash says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to us essentially, let me begin the parsha with something that you could just immediately relate to. Just immediately relate to, and you'll be sensitive to it. So when I tell you that you could have an Eved Ivri, but first of all, you can't keep him forever. He only stays with you for 6 years. That's number one. Number two, you have to treat him with dignity. Number three, you can't give him dishonorable work. Number four, essentially he becomes like an extended member of your family. So now we could relate to all of that because we know what it means to be in servitude and not have any of those things. So therefore the Medrash says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu purposely begins with the discussion of Eved Ivri now, because we were most sensitive to it. Beautiful. If you look at number 7, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, see, he asks, he's bothered by this question as well. He's bothered, in other words, and again, the Rebbe actually asks it in a little bit more of an expanded way. So number one, he asked the question that we said before, which is, even if you feel compelled to go ahead and discuss Eved Ivri in the beginning of the parasha, the laws of theft should really be brought down first, and then the laws of Eved Ivri. He also adds in one more technical point, which we're not going to delve into, but just quickly, the laws of Eved Ivri only apply when? Only apply when there's Yovel. Right? Remember again, Yovel, the Jubilee year, the Yovel is the 50th year after 7 Shemitah cycles. Yovel only applies when the majority of Am Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael. I'll tell you something very exciting, that probably like in the next couple of years, the majority of Am Yisrael is going to be living in Eretz Yisrael, which is actually has not happened since the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, which is a fascinating dynamic that changes the realities of Klal Yisrael in many different ways. So it's really, again, we're hitting that point, and they predict the next couple of years, the majority, just like, this past Shemitah cycle, this past Shemitah, when was Shemitah? 2 years ago? A year ago? Yeah, 2 years ago. There were the record, they say that there were more farmers keeping Shemitah this last Shemitah year, it's the largest number of farms keeping Shemitah since the times of the second Beis HaMikdash. Incredible. So the notion that 51% of Klal Yisrael will soon be in Eretz Yisrael, also incredible. In any event, the Rebbe says, Eved Ivri doesn't even apply all the time. Right? Like today, if you decided, you know what, I would like to have an Eved Ivri, right? My neighbor has one. They redid their kitchen and they got an Eved Ivri. I'm getting an Eved Ivri also. You can't even get an Eved Ivri, right? You can't get one. There's no Eved Ivri if there's no Yovel. So the Rebbe says, I don't understand. It's not even a timeless halacha, right? In other words, Eved Ivri hasn't applied for the last 2,000 years. So Parashas Mishpatim is filled with so many important timeless halachas. Why not begin with something from there? Why begin with Eved Ivri? So look what the Rebbe says, and this is really incredible. He says as follows, skip to paragraph Hey. I put more on the sheet than what we're going to cover. You can look at it on your own, but look at paragraph A. So here the Lubavitcher Rebbe says something so incredibly beautiful. He says, Tchunasam shal mishpatim misbatas b'miyucha b'dinei Eved Ivri. The Rebbe says it's because, part of the beauty in Torah, right? Everything in Torah has two different levels of understanding. There's ultimately, again, the stated, and I don't want to call it superficial because nothing in the Torah is superficial, but we'll call this like the stated or surface understanding of what the Torah is saying, and then there's the panemius. There's the inner neshama, the inner meaning, the inner depth, and every single word in Torah, every single word Chash Baruch Hu gave us has like this surface meaning and this panemius, this deeper meaning. The Rebbe says, let me tell you what the panemius, what the inner meaning of Eved Ivri is. And look what he writes. Paragraph Hey. This is incredible. He says, Eved Ivri, hu adam nochos biyosim and bechinas ruchnis. An Eved Ivri, if you think about this, just on a basic level, an Eved Ivri is a guy who is on the lowest level of ruchnius. Lowest level of ruchnius. Adam shenit bas bigneva, Va'af nimkar b'shel kach le'eved. So remember again, just let's understand for just a second. If you're an Eved Ivri, right? Let's go through this. What have you done? Number one, you stole. What don't you have? Money. What else don't you have? Status. Good. What else don't you have? Friends or family. Remember again, that means there's no one in my life who's here to bail me out. Right? That's now, by the way, if you kind of draw like a little bit of a psychological sketch over here, right? What is the primary personality trait of a thief? Primary personality trait of a thief. Selfish. If you are selfish, you're going to have a really hard time forging relationships. And if you're selfish, even if you're able to have relationships, you're going to have a really difficult time going ahead and maintaining relationships, because the most important thing in creating and maintaining life relationships is selflessness, a willingness to give and be there for the other. So this guy stole, selfish, no friends and family to bail him out, which probably means that there's an ongoing portrait of selfishness, selfish behavior, self-service. It's all about me, all about what I want, all about what I need. It doesn't matter that it belongs to you. It doesn't matter. It's all about me, a selfish human being. So therefore the Rebbe says, this guy is really on a very low level, an incredibly low level. He says, so now, he's stolen, no relationships, selfish, sold as an Eved. Nitan haya lachshov she'adam chazeh ein harosh ne'asak bo, so again, you would be tempted to think that the Eved Ivri, this guy, is not deserving of our attention. You make your bed, you sleep in it. You're going to be a selfish human being, and that's the way you're choosing to conduct yourself. You reap what you sow. If you're selfish, no one's going to be there to bail you out. There's not going to be any shoulder to cry on. You're selfish, then that leads you to a life of just selfish activity, like stealing and taking from things that are not yours. So again, instinctively I would have said, such a person, he's not our obligation. He's not our obligation. Let him figure it out. However he's going to figure it out. Like you said, you made the bed, now you sleep in it. That's what you would have thought. Turn the page, paragraph Vav. So the Rebbe says something amazing. He says, "Bedinim elu milamedes asonator." Yet by these halachas, and remember again, I just mentioned some of these halachas to you just in passing. The obligation that a person has towards his Eved Ivri, the level of care, the level of concern. By the way, I'd even get into, there's another fascinating halacha. Do you know that when your Eved goes free, there's a mitzvah of hanaka. Right? What is hanaka? You have to give him startup capital. This is wild, right? This is why it's actually the Torah financially disincentivizes buying Jews as servants. Torah doesn't want you doing it, so it makes it incredibly difficult, and probably in the grand scheme of things, a losing proposition. When he leaves, he now is going out into the world, right? He's been rehabilitated. You have to go ahead and give him startup capital. So therefore the Rebbe says, Chaburah teaches us, Shagam Adam Nachos Zeh. Roishi Yasku Bo Ubil Chosav Viaf Bo Yeshlino Bekaved Bechased Uberachamim Lefarnis also Ves Ishto Ubanov Ubeboa East Af Leshakraro Chavshi. So this is incredible. Even this guy, who from the societal lens is a zero, this guy who from a societal lens has divested himself of all holiness, of all goodness, this guy from a societal perspective is the very embodiment and personification of just sustained selfishness. This person who I'd rather say, you know what, I don't want anything to do with this guy. What does Chaburah say? Take care of him. Take care of him. Give him a job. That essentially what Abdus is. By the way, it gets even better. If he happens to be married and has children, guess who's responsible for taking care of his wife and children while he's in servitude? The master. The master. So bring him into your home, give him a job, give him a parnasa, give him a place to live, give him good food, take care of his family, give him an honest living, and when he goes free, ultimately give him startup capital. Give him startup capital. The Rebbe says, second paragraph in paragraph Vav, Dine Eved Ivri Mishkafim. So therefore, what do the laws of Eved Ivri teach us? Eifo es chashivusa u'ma'alaso shel haguf ha'Yehudi, chashivus shehi nitzchis ve'ina mishtana li'olam, tiya ramasu haruchana shel Yehudi asher tiya. This is so incredibly beautiful. Essentially says Lubavitcher Rebbe, do you know what Eved Ivri teaches us? Eved Ivri teaches us that no matter how badly a person messes up in life, you're not a zero. No matter how badly you mess up in life, you have not divested yourself of your personalistic goodness. No matter how many wrong turns, no matter how many poor decisions you have made, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and by extension Klal Yisrael, never washes its hands of you. We are not, sometimes you like to think that we are what's the expression? We are the sum or the composite of all of our decisions. Sometimes we're not. Sometimes the sum or the composite of all my decisions equals to zero, because I've made a lot of poor decisions in my life and they've gotten me nowhere. Even if I've really engaged in systemic poor decision making and just went on so many bad paths and did so many bad things, and ultimately, again, it'd be tempting to think that I'm a zero. I'm not. And who proves that? Eved Ivri. Because if you would think that anyone is going to be a zero, it's going to be this guy. And yet, what does the HaKadosh Baruch Hu essentially say to the greater community? Don't give up on this person. Don't give up. Bring him in. Give him a life. Literally, again, like nurture him back to health. It's interesting. The word for like the startup capital is ha'anaka, right? So anak, the shoresh there can mean two things, right? It can mean what? Giant, and also like lahanik is to nurse. It's incredible to see that so much of the process of Eved Ivri is taking a person who is so profoundly broken because all of his poor life decisions, restoring his confidence, restoring his sense of self, and making him realize that even in life when you make really bad and poor decisions, it does not mean that you're a nothing. People have the ability to rebound. People have the ability to reinvent themselves. People have the ability ultimately to rebuild. We all have that opportunity and that ability inside of us. Skip down to paragraph Yud. Watch this. He says, Lekach misyaches hamusa gineva b'mashmaos haruchnis. He goes on, he says, Kishem, Shaganav oses masa b'seiser umachashakim, mitoch tikva shishle. So let me just tell you this, some of this outside just for a moment. Actually, let's skip a little bit. Skip first to paragraph Yud Aleph. So the Rebbe says over something amazing. He says, Lochein, Posacha Satoros HaMishpatim Dafka Bedino Shalganav Shinimcha B'Gnevaso. This is incredible. Remember again, what was the question? What was our question? Why do we start with Eved Ivri? Really, right? It's a multi-tiered question. Out of all the halachos and mishpatim, why start with Eved Ivri? First of all, again, we're going to start with Eved Ivri, start with Geneva, start with laws of theft. And ultimately, Eved Ivri doesn't always apply, right? Only when Yovel. So I start. And I'll tell you why it starts. Because the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu opens up our journey into Yiddishkeit is with the most important life lesson. What is the most important life lesson? Well, the most important life lesson, that making bad decisions in life doesn't make you a zero. Making bad decisions in life makes you human. Now, making repeated bad decisions in life may make you foolish. But even if you're foolish, you're not a zero. HaKadosh Baruch Hu starts off with the halachos of Eved Ivri, because what Eved Ivri teaches us is that even if we mess up badly in life, even if we're selfish, even if we disregard others, even HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even if we live lives of self-centeredness, and even if we live lives where we just literally lose sight of everything that is important, and as a result, I make some tremendous mistakes, I have the ability to rebound. I have not divested myself of my personalistic holiness. I have the ability to be nursed back to health. I have the ability to be nurtured back to health. I have the ability to get myself together and rebuild myself in my life into something more beautiful. He goes on, he says, look at Aleph. Lochein, posachas hatoras hamishpatim dafka b'dino shalganov shinim kar b'gnevaso. Therefore, the Torah purposely begins the parasha with the halachos of the ganav who sold. Shekein la'achar matan Torah mishenotzar efsharos likashal b'gneva notzar hatzorach lilmod lahorish shegam mishenichshal b'kach yesh lo tikun. Torah is teaching us that no matter how badly you mess up in life, you could fix it. Now, let's qualify that a little bit. There are times in life where we make mistakes and the mistakes can't be undone, right? The mistakes are there. And the results sometimes cannot be undone, right? You can't turn back the clock on certain things. But even when you can't turn back the clock, you could still plot a new path forward. You're right, I can't change the past. We just had it in today's daf. The Gemara spoke about the idea that once coins become tarnished, because they used to have their coins were like real silver, once it becomes tarnished, you can never really get it back to that original shine. And it's an incredible metaphor for life, that there are times, especially as we go on in life, there are things that I've done, and it kind of leaves the tarnish. The tarnish is there. Right? I'm not the same person now that I was 20 years ago, because I made a lot of wrong turns and a lot of mistakes, and hopefully some of them I was able to kind of, reverse out of, but some of them I couldn't. The damage was done. But even if the damage is done, that doesn't mean you can't build something beautiful going forward. That doesn't mean that you can't plot for yourself a new direction. Who teaches us that? Eved Ivri. Eved Ivri is the guy who hit rock bottom. He has nothing. He has nothing in life, literally, physically, materially, nothing. He has no one because no one is helping to bail him out. So you would think a guy who has nothing and a guy who has no one literally hit the bottom of the barrel. Such a person, they're done. And Chaburah Hu comes and teaches us the laws of Eved Ivri to teach us that even such a person like that ultimately, again, has a tikkun. Right? That person could be fixed as well. The Rebbe ends off in paragraph Yud Beis, actually quite beautifully. He says, Umat tikkun zeh, how does the Eved Ivri rectify himself? Right? How does he change things around? Sheish shanim yavod ubashviyas yetzi lechav shechinam. This is actually quite beautiful. How does the person fix himself? The Rebbe says, Alav letakin es ma'asav ayidei avodas hatshuva. This is actually very beautiful interpretation. Sheish shanim ya'avo, which means for 6 years, although the Rebbe is using more as a metaphor, you have to engage in avodas Hashem. If you want to be someone different in life, the only way to do that in a meaningful way is to connect yourself with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, by the way, why is that? Just as an aside, why does connection with God give me the ability to transform into someone new? It's very simple. The Ribono Shel Olam is an entity that is omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not bound by time. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not bound by space. He could be anything and everything. And when you connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you can tap into that same power to be anything and be anyone. If you're going at it on your own, there's a limit to what you could do. But if you tap in and you connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then suddenly again the opportunities and the koach and the abilities become limitless. The Rebbe says that's what it means. What does the Eved Ivri do? Sheish shanim ya'avot. If you're willing to put in the work, right? Change is, you know what the challenge is? You know what the challenge is? We all want change. But what don't we want? What don't we want? We don't want work, right? So I want to go, right? It's like I want the therapist, the rabbi, the teacher, just like give me that like golden piece of advice that is going to flip the switch and now ta-da, right? I'm a new person. Or give me the pill, right? Give me the thing that's going to like, and again, absolutely, sometimes the medication absolutely helps. And of course the therapy helps and the guidance helps. But at the end of the day, it's work. It's work. If you want to change in life, the only way that happens is sustained work. Sheish shanim ya'avod. If you're willing to plug away, and by the way, it's not just a day, it's not just a week, it's not just a month, 6 years. And by the way, it's not just 6 years, it's much more than 6 years. But 6 years represents sustained effort. And if you're willing to put in the sustained effort, then what? Ubashviyas yetzi lechav shechinam. Then in year number 7, at some point down the road, you will be free from the baggage that has weighed you down. If you're willing to do the work, right? If you're willing to work your personal program, if you are willing to commit yourself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you're really willing to put in the effort to affect change for a sustained amount of time, the change will stick. One day you will go free from your baggage. One day you'll be able to leave that other stuff that is so negative and so nasty and so terrible and so dark. I can leave it behind and I could become someone new. That says the Lubavitch Rebbe. It's incredible. That says the Lubavitch Rebbe is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu begins Parshas Mishpatim with the laws of Evet Ivri. Not because it's interesting, because it's not, right? Not because, right, somehow again the halachas are fascinating, they are, but why this? Because Kadosh Baruch Hu is trying to teach us the most important lesson of all, which is, when you mess up in life, do not give up on yourself. When you mess up in life, just know that if you're willing to put in the effort, and you're willing to do the work, and you're willing to put in sustained work and sustained effort, you too could affect change in your life. The most incredible, overwhelming lesson. Let's bring this full circle, and I want to conclude. So now full circle. So remember again, what happens? We went back, right? What's happening for David HaMelech in Kapitel Ayin Aleph, right? Remember again, what was happening? In Pasuk Yud, David HaMelech is all despondent. My enemies are telling me, my enemies are saying, ultimately my enemies and even my friends, who I thought were my friends, are backstabbers, and now they're also saying, everybody's saying, God has forsaken this guy. Why did God forsake David HaMelech? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu forsake David? Or why would people say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had forsaken David HaMelech? Because of his negative behavior, because of his dramatic mistakes. So everyone says, I've made such mistakes. Essentially, look at David. He's an Evet Ivri, right? He's that guy. He's that guy that took something that did not belong to him. He is that person who exhibited selfish behavior. He's that person who only thought about himself. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want anything to do with such a person like that. And remember again, by the time we get to the end of the kapitel, what happens? David HaMelech says, Gam l'shoni kol yom tegi atzichot. By the end of the kapitel, David HaMelech is hopeful, optimistic. Where did David HaMelech's optimism come from? Where did the internal shift come from? And perhaps the answer is, where did it come from? David HaMelech opened up Parshas Mishpatim, and he learned the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right? The Rebbe's Torah is timeless. The Rebbe helped out David HaMelech also. David HaMelech saw Parshas Mishpatim. And what did he see when he saw Parshas Mishpatim? Evet Ivri. Evet Ivri. What's Evet Ivri? No matter how badly you mess up in life, and some of us, right? There are doozies, right? No matter how badly I mess up in life, no one is beyond repair. No one is beyond salvation. David opens up Parshas Mishpatim and he says, you know what? I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. But do you know why David HaMelech was fine? Because he committed himself, like the Rebbe says, to Sheish Shanim Yavod Ubashvias Yetze L'chav Shechinam. David HaMelech was fine because he committed himself to a lifetime of work. Because he committed himself to the quote-unquote 6 years of intense, personalistic, comprehensive, cathartic change. And if you're willing to do that, Ubashvias Yetze L'chav Shechinam, then you too, like David HaMelech, could move past your personal baggage. That's the change that David HaMelech undergoes in Kapitel Ayin Aleph. It wasn't a change by anyone else, because remember, I say this all the time, remember, did the people in David HaMelech's life, did their attitude change towards him? Did that change? No, we saw it many times. Remember, David HaMelech is on his deathbed. What's happening when David HaMelech is on his deathbed? What's happening? His son, Adoniyahu ben Chagis, is proclaiming himself as king. David is dying. Just let the man die in peace. No one let him live in peace. Let him die in peace. David HaMelech can't even die in peace. His enemies were literally again at his doorstep till the moment he left this world. So David said, I'm never going to find forgiveness, and I'm never going to find a sense of inner quietude, and I'm never going to find simcha from anyone external. It's got to come from inside. And so I know that if at the end of the day, if I become that Evet Ivri, if I become that person who, although he made mistakes, pledges himself to a process of change, a process of self-evolution, a process ultimately, again, of cathartic, comprehensive change, then Bashvias Yetze L'chav Shechinam. Then there comes a point in time where the mistakes of the past become just that, a piece of the past, and don't have to be part of my present, and don't have to be schlepped with me into the future as well. And of course, a profound lesson for all of us. What's true for David is true for us as well. All of us have those moments in life where we make such a big mistake, we say to ourselves, you know what, that's it, I'm done. You guys are very young. You don't have these experiences yet, right? But you'll speak to people a little bit older who have the, right? So again, you have those moments in life where you're like, I'm done. And by the way, the incredible part is, everybody has those moments. Moshe Rabbeinu had those moments. David HaMelech had those moments. Even the greatest of great people have those moments. The difference between great people and great challenged people is that a lot of times not great people just give up. Great people decide to become an Eved Ivri. Great people follow in the footsteps of David HaMelech, follow in the footsteps of Lubavitch Rebbe, follow in the footsteps of Parshas Mishpatim, and are willing to go ahead and acknowledge that which has gone wrong, commit themselves to a process of sheish shanim, of 6 years, and you understand, it's just a metaphor, of 6 years of continuous, comprehensive change, and they know that if they stick to it, ultimately, the mistakes of the past could remain in the past. We'll stop over here for tonight. And Meretz Hashem, next week we continue. We are continuing next week with Kapitel Ayin Beis 72. That's why I did the last pasuk in Ayin Aleph. I can't even go back if I tried. Shkayach, everyone. Have a great night.